Sealed inside a 7,800-ton nuclear submarine, 135 elite volunteers willingly conquer 4,320 hours of grueling sunless isolation. They forge an unbreakable brotherhood to thrive in a brutal environment that strips away every basic human comfort. How do they master their own minds to survive this impossible? Pressure cooker. Let's dive into the extreme classified reality of the silent service. 350 pounds per square inch of hydrostatic pressure. That is the crushing force waiting to instantly implode a steel hull at 800 feet below the surface. 180 days. 135 sailors. Zero sunlight, zero internet. Every biological rule of terrestrial survival is erased. This is not a standard naval deployment. It is the ultimate psychological endurance test inside a $3.2 billion Virginia-class nuclear attack submarine, like the USS Texas SSN 775. To survive this extreme isolation, you must control the mind's only remaining anchor food. A fast attack submarine operates an impossibly cramped galley measuring exactly 10 by 14 feet. Inside this 140 square foot steel box, two active culinary specialists relentlessly produce 4 high-calorie meals every 24 hours. They must flawlessly sustain 135 men. But a submarine lacks critical bulk storage. So where does the Navy stash an extra 15,000 pounds of vital provisions? Everywhere. They tightly stack oversized number 10 cans of vegetables floor to ceiling inside the narrow 36-inch passageways. Sailors lay heavy 3/4-inch plywood directly over the cans to create temporary decks. For the first 14 days of a combat patrol, the crew must physically hunch over to navigate the boat. They call this tactical consumption eating your way down. As the food vanishes, the steel corridors slowly expand. But food serves a far greater tactical purpose than basic nutrition. It is the only calendar that still functions. When the brain loses the sun, it shatters the concept of time. But when you smell freshly baked cinnamon rolls, that is undeniably Saturday morning. Now let us examine the brutal military reality. You might assume a sonar technician submarine, an STS sitting perfectly still in a dark and temperature-controlled acoustic shack burns minimal physical energy. You would be dead wrong. The sheer punishing cognitive load is immense, filtering complex broadband ocean acoustics, isolating a faint 50 Hz frequency shift, and properly classifying a lethal Russian Yasin M-class submarine requires absolute neural overload. This intense mental processing actively burns upwards of 3,000 calories every single day. The human brain constantly consumes massive energy under lethal combat stress. This brings us directly to the fragile human element. Those two culinary specialists, sweating inside the 104-degree Fahrenheit galley, are not just regular military cooks. They are the critical frontline combat psychologists of the entire boat. After 90 consecutive days fully submerged in insidious isolation, depression violently stalks the crew. When a 19-year-old sailor is staring blankly into the terrifying abyss of psychological collapse, a hot 16-ounce barbecue, ribeye steak tasting exactly like his Texas hometown, holds infinitely more healing power than any commanding officer's speech. The desperate human brain aggressively clings to the warm, familiar scent of toasted garlic bread, just to remember what it actually means to be a living human being. But then the comforting illusion violently shatters. You are sitting quietly in the crew's mess. Your heavy fork is halfway to your mouth, savoring a fleeting rare moment of absolute peace. Suddenly, the 1MC announcing system violently pierces the heavy air. General quarters, man your battle stations. The tactical alarms scream. Heavy steel trays are instantly hurled aside. The psychological hunger instantly evaporates into absolute nothingness. The primal, highly trained killer instinct violently takes ultimate command. 135 men sprint furiously into the claustrophobic, red-lit darkness. They are fully prepared to wage total catastrophic war with completely empty, aching stomachs. Do you truly believe that sometimes the razor-thin boundary between a highly disciplined steel warrior and a completely broken mind is simply a cold, leftover pastry if you deeply respect the devastating sacrifices and unwavering discipline of the brave men serving silently in the United States Submarine Force? Hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Join us today as we bravely uncover the darkest, most highly classified corners of modern naval warfare that most civilians will never truly comprehend. The human stomach may be temporarily pacified, but the physical body is actively suffocating. You are completely covered in toxic hydraulic oil, pungent amine gas, and 14 long days of dried sweat. What exactly do you do when you suddenly realize that simply washing your own body is a direct catastrophic betrayal of the very fragile lives of your 134 brothers? You step carefully into a stainless steel stall that feels significantly more like a vertical coffin than a shower. At home, you casually waste 60 gallons of scalding hot water over a luxurious 10-minute morning routine. Down here, that same indulgence is considered an unforgivable crime against the crew. You are strictly allotted the legendary Navy Shower Boutique, a rigidly choreographed 90-second military operation. You get precisely 30 seconds of water to wet your skin. Turn the valve off, furiously scrub your filthy body in the freezing, mechanically circulated air, and then 60 seconds to rinse. You consume a maximum of 3 gallons. And do not even dream of warmth. Every precious drop of hot water is aggressively diverted to the galley to sanitize cooking equipment. Your shower is always shockingly, breathtakingly cold. You might wonder why a vessel surrounded by a virtually infinite ocean must painstakingly hoard water like a desperate desert outpost. A modern Virginia-class submarine is equipped with a state-of-the-art reverse osmosis distilling plant, an engineering masterpiece capable of violently forcing seawater through microscopic membranes. This is technological marvel generates up to 40,000 gallons of ultra-pure fresh water every single day. However, you are positioned at the absolute bottom of the priority list. The beating heart of the submarine, the 40,000 shaft horsepower S9G nuclear reactor, demands an endless, flawless supply of purified coolant to prevent a catastrophic core meltdown. Electronic combat systems require continuous chilling to function properly. The men only get the leftover scraps. But the true terror of a shower is not the freezing temperature or the strict rationing. It is the lethal consequence of the runoff. Every single drop of soapy runoff becomes gray water pooling in holding tanks deep within the submarine's lower levels. These tanks have a strict maximum capacity. Eventually, they must be forcefully pumped overboard against massive external oceanic pressure. Activating those heavy ejection pumps generates a distinct mechanical acoustic signature. In the silent theater of anti-submarine warfare, that brief pumping noise acts as a blaring underwater siren. It is the exact acoustic anomaly that invites a lethal 50-knot wake-homing torpedo to violently rip your pressure hull into jagged metal shrapnel. This terrifying tactical reality forces a brutal internal war within the mind of every sailor. You endure profound physical torture as thick layers of toxic 2,190 TEP hydraulic fluid, highly acidic sweat, and microscopic diesel grime violently bake into your pores. For weeks on end, your skin painfully stretches constantly, itching and burning under the heavy static-infused fabric of your uniform. You desperately crave a single, agonizingly sweet moment of warm water to simply feel human again. Yet the relentless discipline of survival violently crushes that basic human dignity. The men aggressively train their minds to completely numb the desire for cleanliness. Showering ceases to be a human relief. It becomes a shivering, teeth-chattering military chore. Imagine standing completely naked in that freezing stall, your eyes burning fiercely from cheap military-grade soap. Suddenly, the tactical lights snap to blood red, and the dreaded, chilling order drops over the 1MC internal announcing system. Rig for ultra quiet. Every non-essential mechanical system is instantly brutally severed. The shower head violently sputters, chokes, and immediately dies. You absolutely cannot speak. You cannot drop the soap. You cannot even step out of the stall because your wet boots might squeak against the steel decking. You are forced to stand perfectly still, violently shivering in the suffocating darkness as the acidic soap slowly dries into a cracking, agonizing crust on your skin for 4 excruciating hours of submarine hunting. If you suddenly found your vulnerable self physically trapped in that utterly terrifying combat scenario suspended exactly 800 feet below the crushing ocean waves, what exactly would you do? Between the agonizing physical torture of a violently filthy body and the catastrophic risk of a high explosive torpedo detonating against your hull, Would you dare prioritize your own personal comfort over the fragile lives of your 134 brothers? The psychological endurance required to navigate this filth is simply staggering. Yet, even when you finally survive the agonizing dirt, your broken body violently screams for rest. But how exactly do you find peace and close your eyes when your designated bed is a claustrophobic steel coffin that still holds the terrifying warmth and damp breath of another man? How do you physically rest 135 exhausted human beings when your billion-dollar warship only possesses 94 designated beds? You execute a ruthless logistical strategy officially known as hot racking. Three grown men are mathematically forced to violently share two tiny mattresses in heavily staggered shifts. There are no permanently assigned sanctuaries down here. When your grueling 8-hour watch officially ends, you stagger blindly into the cramped berthing area. You aggressively strip the thin sheets left by the previous sailor and slide into a dark, suffocating slot. You are now completely entombed. The vertical clearance from the tip of your nose to the freezing steel plating above is exactly 18 inches. It feels identically terrifying to sliding into a fully operational MRI machine, but without any emergency exit button. Claustrophobia relentlessly assaults the fragile edges of your exhausted sanity. Every tiny physical movement violently scrapes your broad shoulders against the cold, unforgiving bulkheads. You absolutely cannot sit up. You cannot fully turn over without expertly contorting your aching spine. This microscopic rectangular void is your only private sanctuary for 180 grueling days. The psychological violation of hot racking is profoundly disturbing to the human mind. As you finally collapse onto the thin mattress, you instantly feel the sickening residual 98.6-degree body heat of the sailor who just vacated it. The cheap foam is deeply compressed by his heavy weight. The stagnant air still vividly carries the sharp acidic scent of his dried sweat. You are forced to share a profound, non-consensual physical intimacy with 134 other desperate men. You silently endure their violent snores, their terrified sleep-talking, and the deafening, relentless roar of the ventilation fans. To physically survive this relentless sensory assault, submariners must aggressively train themselves to violently dissociate. They forcefully detach their screaming minds from their physically trapped bodies. They heavily deploy cheap foam earplugs and thin fabric privacy curtains as their only pathetic defense mechanisms. But before the historic year of 2015, the United States Navy actively waged a catastrophic unintentional biological war against its own crews. The submarine fleet rigidly operated on an unnatural, highly destructive 18-hour daily schedule. 6 hours on watch, 6 hours of maintenance, 6 hours of restless sleep. This brutal 18-hour cycle actively defied millions of years of human biological evolution. Deep underground, completely robbed of natural sunlight, the sailors' brains completely halted the vital production of melatonin. Hard data from the Naval Submarine Medical Research Laboratory quickly revealed a terrifying truth. After 60 days of severe circadian misalignment, the crew's critical neurological reaction times violently plummeted by a staggering 40%. The men were essentially functioning as heavily intoxicated, sleep-deprived zombies. They were desperately operating critical nuclear reactors and highly advanced weapon systems while actively hallucinating from severe exhaustion. This catastrophic exhaustion almost triggered a lethal maritime disaster that remains classified. In the dark days before the critical 2015 schedule change, a severely sleep-deprived sonar technician submarine and STS experienced a terrifying auditory hallucination. Staring blankly at the glowing green waterfall display, his exhausted brain aggressively misclassified the distinct three-bladed cavitation of a hostile guided missile destroyer. He nearly reported it as the harmless biological clicks of a passing sperm whale. That microscopic fatigue-induced cognitive error nearly exposed an entire nuclear submarine to an instantaneous fiery death. That terrifying near miss forced the Navy brass to confront a harsh, undeniable reality. A human being is not an easily programmable, unfeeling machine. You can brilliantly engineer a nuclear reactor to run continuously for 33 years, but you absolutely cannot force a human brain to violently ignore its own circadian rhythm. The historic shift to a standard 24-hour cycle literally saved the psychological survival of the modern submarine force. It desperately pulled an entire generation of silent warriors back from the terrifying brink of total cognitive collapse. Have you ever been forced to passionately share an impossibly tight, suffocating space, silently listening to the heavy breathing of a furious crewmate that you just aggressively argued with that exact same morning? You can tightly squeeze your eyes completely shut to desperately hide from this claustrophobic nightmare. But there is one biological function you cannot halt for even 3 minutes. How exactly will you react when you suddenly realize that the very recycled air keeping you alive is actually a highly volatile, ticking chemical time bomb? Every single breath you casually take at 800 feet below the surface is completely manufactured. You are breathing a highly volatile chemical equation. The Central Atmosphere Monitoring System, or CAMS, runs relentlessly. It constantly measures oxygen, carbon monoxide, and deadly carbon dioxide. Humans naturally exhale roughly 4.5% CO2 with every single breath. Inside a sealed pressure hull, that invisible gas rapidly accumulates. Without aggressive chemical intervention, the entire crew would quietly slip into a lethal, irreversible coma. To survive this slow asphyxiation, the Navy deploys a highly aggressive chemical compound called monoethanolamine, or MEA. Giant ventilation fans forcefully push the contaminated air through heavy columns of cold MEA solution. The chemical violently strips the deadly CO2 molecules directly from the atmosphere. Simultaneously, massive electrolysis units rip purified seawater apart using high electrical current, safely releasing pure oxygen. But this critical life support mechanism demands a horrific biological toll. The MEA vaporizes into the recycled air. This creates the legendary, highly classified submarine smell. It is a pungent, inescapable nightmare of vaporized amine raw diesel fuel, acidic sweat, and cheap institutional soap. This toxic perfume aggressively bypasses your lungs and physically permeates your cells. It violently bakes into your hair, your skin, and your uniforms. It becomes your permanent biological signature. When a submarine finally docks after a grueling 180-day patrol, families standing on the pier can instantly smell their loved ones, the exact second that heavy steel hatch loudly pops open. Yet inside this suffocating, foul-smelling darkness, something undeniably beautiful is violently forged. A profound, unbreakable brotherhood naturally blooms in the claustrophobic abyss. There is no internet to distract them. They only have each other. They brutally compete in high-stakes cribbage tournaments. They fiercely celebrate halfway night with frozen lobster tails and prime rib to mark the midpoint of their agonizing isolation. They survive the psychological, crushing weight of the deep ocean by forging bonds of absolute, unwavering trust. This profound trust transcends all standard military ranks. Down here, the raw survival of a highly decorated 45-year-old commanding officer rests entirely in the grease-stained hands of a 19-year-old machinist's mate. If that exhausted teenager makes a single microscopic miscalculation while strictly managing the high-pressure hydraulic manifolds, the entire $3.2 billion warship will catastrophically flood. They do not just blindly follow orders, they literally hold each other's fragile lives in their severely cramped, calloused hands every single second of the day. This brings us directly to the ultimate mind-bending historical twist of naval warfare. The civilian general public is heavily conditioned to falsely believe that the United States Navy's deadliest, most terrifying weapon is the Trident 2D5 nuclear ballistic missile. That is a massive, deliberate tactical miscalculation. The mighty Trident missile is merely an unthinking delivery vehicle. The truly most terrifying, devastatingly effective, and resilient weapon system in the entire United States military arsenal is the disciplined mind and the unbreakable will of the incredibly brave American submariner. These 135 elite warriors are not helplessly trapped inside a dark steel tube. The submarine force is an explicitly 100% volunteer organization. Every single man willingly walked up to a recruiter and specifically asked for this torture. They aggressively volunteered to turn their backs on the warming sun. They intentionally locked themselves inside a sunken steel coffin, willingly stripping away their most basic human rights, just to ensure that the oblivious world above them remains peacefully asleep. If you had to violently trade your personal freedom, the warmth of the sun, and your basic human dignity for this silent, invisible glory, would you possess the sheer courage to sign that volunteer contract? Take a very deep, slow breath right now. The next time you effortlessly fill your lungs with fresh, free air, remember the silent guardians actively suffocating in the dark. What is the absolute final limit of human endurance? If this glimpse into the world of the silent service has given you a new appreciation for their quiet sacrifice, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It is a simple gesture, but it truly helps us continue bringing these untold stories to light.